Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Augusta. Today is our Labor Day service. Labor Day is sometimes jokingly referred to as the holiday when we stop demonizing unions in order to enjoy sales in their honor. Well, our Labor Day sermon is provided by someone from the working class. The title is A Working Man's Perspective, and it's Joseph Zuchowski, aka Yusuf Zuchowski. He is a second-generation Polish immigrant born to a working-class family in Jersey City. He's had many jobs involving manual labor. He's also an actor, writer, storyteller, tarot reader, Wiccan high priest, and he is currently our church custodian. We invite all families to tune in. This service features a time for all ages, which will be a story from the Chinese tradition. It will be right after the chalice lighting. But now I'd like to turn you over to Tim Hunter from the board for our announcements.
Good morning, everyone. So I just made it on. Oh my goodness, these Zoom things are really, really crazy. So I just made it on with like a minute to spare, but thankfully I have my announcements right here. So I do have on a jacket to kind of present a professional appearance. So there you go. Now, I don't have on pants, so I have to, put that out there. But as long as you stay with the waist up, I should be good to go. So there are several UUCA Zoom meetings this week. The parents group will be meeting today at 1300, 1 o'clock, right at 1 o'clock. So you need to register in advance. Please go to your email announcements for registration if you wish to attend. The UU meditation group will be gathering tomorrow, which is Monday at 7 p.m. to meditate. The Goddess Group gathering will occur on Thursday, September 10th at 6 p.m. So for all the goddesses who are looking for something to do, then you can show up there. And for the guys who are staying home, or for your partners who are staying home who are non-binary or whatever, it's also a reminder that football season starts on Thursday the 10th. So there's something for you all to do while the goddesses are out doing their thing. Please check your e-announcements for contact information for these groups. There's also a link on the UUCA calendar that will let you know what is going on at church during the week. And as a reminder, Sunday, September 27th, which is the last Sunday of this month, between the hours of 3 and 5, Rita's Italian Ice Truck will be making a return visit to our church. So we had an awesome time last time that we did that. So please show up and get to socially distance, see people who you haven't seen for months and months and months, and also to enjoy some good ice cream. That's all I have, Jezebel.
Thank you, Tim, and it's perfectly fine if all of you are out there watching us in your pajamas. We don't judge. But now let us enter into our time of worship. The music director, David Netchus, will lead us in our opening hymn.
Good Sunday morning, everybody. Our opening hymn is number 112, Do You Hear? It's a famous American folk melody. And if you were joining us during our prelude, you heard me play the variation on the melody. So hopefully it'll be familiar to you. cry through the land. Do you hear? Do you hear? In the heights, in the plain, in the vale, in the main, in the sun, in the rain. Do you hear? Do you hear? Through the roar, through the rush, through the throng, through the crush. Do you hear in the hush? Give your soul of your soul. Hear the cry, fearing still. Hear the heart's call to will. Hear a sigh, starling shrill. In your soul, in your soul. From the place where you stand to the outermost strand, do you hear, oh my friend? Do you hear all the dreams, all the dares, all the sighs, all the prayers? Are they yours, mine, and theirs? Do you hear? Do you hear?
Our opening words today are by Langston Hughes from Let America Be America Again. Oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet, and yet must be, the land where every man is free, the land that's mine, the poor man's, Indians, Negroes, me, who made America, whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain, whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain, must bring back our mighty dream again. Out of the rack and ruin of our gangster death, the rape and rot of graft and stealth and lies, we the people must redeem the land, the mines, the plants, the rivers, the mountains, and the endless plains, all the stretch of these great green states, and make America again. And this morning, we light our chalice in honor of the sacrifice and struggle of the workers who have sought for justice.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. Giving life the shape of justice, roots only close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
And now it's time for all ages to gather round and hear the tale of the stonecutter by Yusuf the Storyteller.
早安，你好吗？我好，谢谢你。If you're wondering why I chose to begin in Chinese, it's very simple. This story comes from China. And I learned it many years ago, and it's always been one of my favorites. And it is called the story of Wu the Stonecutter. Many years ago in China, there lived an old man whose name was Wu. Now, to some of the people in his village, he was just simply old Wu. And then to others, he was Wu the stonecutter. Wu the stonecutter lived in a small village, and he had a small hut and his few possessions. And every morning, just as the sun was coming up over the horizon, Wu would pack his simple lunch, put it in his side bag, put on his water flask, pick up his tools, and go to the mountain, where he would spend his day cutting stone from the mountain. He would swing his great pick, breaking the stones. He would hammer them. He would pull them out and help load them onto the carts to be taken off, to be finished, and to be used for building of cities, of towns, of houses, everything. One day, while he sat and enjoyed his simple fare, he heard drums and trumpets. And he looked, and in the distance he saw a great procession. There were drummers and trumpeters, flag bearers, warriors, and they all surrounded a sedan chair, a couch that was carried on the shoulders of strong men. And in the chair was the Duke of the province. And Wu watched the procession as it passed by. He shook his head and said, "Hi-ya. The Duke has such fine clothes, I wear only rags. The Duke eats great food, and I must settle for simple fare. I wish I were the Duke," said Wu. And the spirit of the mountain heard him. And Wu the stonecutter became Wu the Duke. He wore fine clothes made of silk and brocade. He had good meals brought to him on platters carried by servants. He had people to attend his every wish, but he also had something else, responsibilities. His courtiers would come to him every day. "Duke Wu, bandits are attacking the western provinces. What shall we do? Duke Wu, the people complain of taxes. What shall we do? Duke Wu, all day long, all he heard was headaches and problems that he had to solve because he was the Duke. One day this became too much for him, and he ran out, and he left the palace, and he found himself a place to hide in the forest. And the sun had gone down, so it was very dark, and he was wearing dark clothes, so he could hide very well. And he heard people coming looking for him, carrying torches, looking high and low, and he's hid in the darkness. And he said, "I'm safe here." He went to sleep, and he woke up because the sun was coming up. And as the sun was coming up, it revealed where he was hiding. And all the courtiers came and said, "Duke Wu, we've been looking for you all night. We need to know what you intend to do about this problem, what you intend to do about that problem." And the Duke sat there and go, "Yeah, the sun is so much more powerful than I. I wish I were the sun." And he became the sun. He stood there, proud and strong, giving out heat and light to everything around him. He said, "Nothing is more powerful than the sun." But he became too enraptured in his own power. And he began to glow more and more until the land began to dry and famine came and drought. And the people called upon magicians and priests to work their magic and they do their prayers so that the rains would come. And the clouds formed and it began to rain. And no matter what Duke Wu, who was the sun, who was before the Duke, could do, could not stop the rain. "Ayah," said the sun who was Wu, "the rain is more powerful than I. I wish I were the rain." And he became the rain. And he would not stop raining. He would just rain and rain and rain. The rivers overflowed. The fields were flooded. The villages were flooded. And the people started running to the mountain. And he decided that he would wash away the mountain to show his power. And he rained upon the mountain, but the mountain remained. And the Duke and the son who was Wu, who had been the Duke who was Wu, who had been the stonecutter who was Wu, said, "The mountain is more powerful than I. I wish I were the mountain." And he became the mountain. He became still and peaceful. He had no cares, no worries, no labor. He just sat there. The land dried, crops regrew, and the mountain just sat there. One morning, as the mountain sat there, he heard something. Bink, 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 bink. And he felt something cutting into him. And he opened his eyes and looked. There was a stone cutter. There were many stone cutters, and each one was taking parts of him away. And the mountain was sat there, who had been woo the stone cutter, who had been woo the duke, who had been woo the sun, woo the rain. He said, these stone cutters are stronger than I. They will cut me to pieces. They will take me away. I wish I were a stone cutter. And old Wu put on his carry sack, his water flagon, picked up his pick and shovel, and went off to chip away at the mountain.
Thank you, Yusef. And now this is the time when we will be sharing our joys and concerns. I would like to give you an update on Reverend Don. He's progressing more and more from his recovery. He's able to drive now. He'll be back in the pulpit next weekend. And the rest of the joys and sorrows will not be recorded in order to preserve privacy. Here now is Margaret Tuck of our pastoral care team.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Now is the time in our service where you are invited to share joys and sorrows that have come into your lives. We first remember those who cannot be with us today, and we also remember those in the military service, serving abroad and away from their families. I would also like on this Labor Day to especially remember in this time of the pandemic, the many essential workers who are putting their lives on the line to share and care for those who are in painful and struggling circumstances at this time. If you wish to share.
All right, then I will drop one stone for our collective joys and sorrows. And now is our time of meditation. So I'd like to invite you to relax in your chair or on your couch or wherever you are. Just allow your body to totally sink in, feel supported by the earth. Unclench your shoulders, relax your jaws. Notice if your body's holding any tension anywhere. It might be your knees or your back. And simply breathe into it. Allow your breath to go deep into your belly. Allow the air fill you up and gently release. And I'd like us all to think about the web of life. We almost hear this phrase, interconnected web of life, like a cliche. But we really need to think at times about our connections, especially in this time of pandemic when we don't have the same types of communications or social interactions that we normally do. And let's take a moment and focus on our personal webs of connection, our friends, our families. I know with recent political and social situations, there's also been a lot of discord and many webs have been ruptured. And there are times that webs need to be rewoven, strands need to be reconnected. So I would invite you to think about your own webs during our time of silence. And the graphic I'm using is of a spider web, which is one of the most beautiful images of nature. And spiders are a creature that some people like them, some people are terrified of them. But remember, everything is a part of the web of life, even the things that may be scary, because spiders eat a lot of other bugs and things, and I'm personally rather fond of them. And the image of weaving, making these connections, has been both in metaphor and reality, coming back to the physical reality of when humans first learned to weave cloth, to this great internet that allows us to do these Zoom services. So now I will let the chime take us in and out of silence as we focus on our webs. And part of our web of life also includes our financial webs and what we choose to support with our resources, which may be even more limited in these stressful times. Now is the time when we ask for your generosity to sustain our church so that we can continue to weave our webs of community and support. And one request from the office is that for larger donations in particular, or pledges, if it's possible to send a check so the church does not have to pay PayPal fees, that is much appreciated. But now we will ask for your generosity in whatever form, at whatever level is comfortable for you, and know that we appreciate it. Here's our offertory. We very much appreciate your generosity as we continue to weave our webs. And the Unitarian Universalist Association is part of a much vaster network of web weaving. They have asked that congregations take a special collection for the UUA Disaster Relief Funds. This fund assists UUs with food, water, shelter, and sanitation in recent areas of crisis, such as the areas affected by the hurricanes in the Gulf, the fires in the West, tornadoes in the Midwest, along with the devastation caused by this pandemic. Please send donations by check to our church with Disaster Relief Fund in the memo line. And now our guest speaker is making his way to the pulpit. And for those who have never heard him speak, his style is more of the old school universalist side. Here is Zuchowski.
Good morning, and thank you for allowing me to be here today. This probably will be the last time I'm here today after I finish speaking, but that's besides the point. Anyway, I want to thank you all for allowing me this pleasure and an honor. And Don, I would hope it had been you here today, but me. But roll of the die, man. What are we going to do? As my partner in crime, Jezebel, has informed you, I was born in a working class family in Jersey City. My parents were the children of immigrants. My family mostly came from Poland, different parts of Poland, but they gathered together here in the United States. It seems that one of my Polish ancestors was worked in the animal industry. He was an animal liberationist. He would liberate the animals from one farm and sell them and move them over until it became rather unhealthy for him to continue that there, and he brought his skills to America. He was the first Zuchowski to come over here and establish himself as a working man in animal liberation and transportation. But that explains a lot about my family, let me tell you. My parents were born here. Their parents were not. My father's family, ironically, actually was middle class. They own a relatively comfortable hotel in what was today in Warsaw, except for the youngest son, Willem, my great-grandfather. Willem was the youngest, so therefore he didn't quite have the same prestige as his older brothers, and he was part of that family. He chose to go into the army. He was a member, he was in the Austro-Hungarian army because part of Poland was controlled by that nation, by that empire at one time. My other grandfather, great-grandfather, was an accountant, and his wife ran a dress shop. And the woman who would be my grandmother often helped in her mother in the making of the dresses. But they came to America, a land where they had virtually no contacts from their homeland, a land where they had no real knowledge of the language. They would learn it as they went along. But they knew one thing. My grandfathers knew they had to work. They had to support their families. I'm wearing a railroad cap today because, ironically, both of my grandfathers worked for the railroad. My mother's father was a trackman. My mother's father was a coal sacker. My father's father was a trackman. Now, for those who are unfamiliar, a coal sacker, basically, when the trains came in from the coal mines of West Virginia, of Kentucky, of Pennsylvania, wherever, they would dump these huge piles of coal. And the coal sackers with hammers and shovels would break up the larger ones and shovel them into burlap sacks to be loaded onto carts, to be taken to be sold throughout the Northeast and the Midwest, wherever. My grandfather made approximately 15 cents per sack of coal. Think about that, 15 cents. But think of what 15 cents was like in the early 1900s. My grandfather, my mother's father, he served in the United States Army in World War I. Because he could speak Polish, English at this point, and some German, he was used as a translator. My grandfather did not even know that his family was alive. They had lost contact with each other. So when he returned to America after a stint in the army, he was surprised to learn that he still had a wife and children. My grandmother on my father's side held two of her children as they died of the Spanish flu. These were the stories I was told. Both my grandfathers were involved in the unions, a time when such involvement was criminal. My grandfather was a giant, and my mother's father was a giant of a man, standing well over 6 feet tall. That's something I wish I could have inherited, but you deal with what you get. What can I tell you? Because of his size and strength and his rather rambunctious nature, he was often granted the title of Sergeant at Arms at the meetings to maintain order. There was a time when several strike breakers were sent in, union busters, and these were men that were taken out of jails. They were paid to go into the union to break up the meetings. And the man who was leading the union meeting turned to my grandfather and said, "Sergeant at Arms, exercise your duty." Of course, he said it to him in much rougher terms. My grandfather got up, walked over to the first man he saw, picked him up, dragged him across the room, and threw him out of a second-story window. When he turned around, the rest of the strikebreakers had left. This was the stories I heard growing up. I also became enamored of the writings of Charles Dickens, one of the most socially conscious writers of his time. When you read the stories of what it was like to be in the working classes of England at the time, or perhaps most of the Western world, one thing we need to remember is that the United States is a nation of immigrants. And even the original people who came here thousands and thousands of years ago, they're immigrants. They came over from Asia. There's no species of humans that ever developed on this continent. We're all immigrants. We came here. The ancient ancestors of the Indians, they came here following the herds across the Bering Straits. They developed cultures. Look at when we think of the work that when we think of the great cultures of Europe, we think of Egypt, we think of Greece, we think of Rome. But how much do we think about the cultures of the Aztecs, the Toltecs? They were a modern Stone Age culture, working with limited mental ability, but they created great cities. Laborers, carpenters, stonemasons. These were, when I look at this sanctuary, I'm thinking masons laid these bricks, carpenters put the woodwork in, electricians, plumbers, painters. Labor is a part of our heritage. There's no shame in it. I was taught it's better to be a janitor than a beggar or a thief. And yet, Kahil Gibram tells us in the prophet, and if you're going to be a beggar, be the best beggar you can. As Jez told you, I've worked mostly working class jobs. I've worked in machine shops. I've worked in machine shops where during the summer, the fans, all they did was circulate hot air. And sometimes during the summer, it was so hot, we would all bring 3 or 4 changes of shirts because within a matter of a half hour or so, the shirts were plastered to our bodies with our sweat. You could wring them out. That's what it was like. In the winter, oh, that heat was comfortable. I've done work I've done grounds work, I've done painting, I've done drywall, I've done a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Though I should have listened to my father early on. He was a mechanic, by the way. He was also he was a rigger mechanic. For those who don't know, he would work on machinery, sometimes 50 to 100 feet in the air, supported only by a 3 or 4 inch wide leather strap. Oblivion was kept from him by that strap. When I think of the stories of my grandfathers, both of whom, I only actually knew one of them. My father's father died when my father and 2 of his uncles were serving in World War II. My mother's father, he died on his job. He stayed with the railroad. Even though he was past his prime, even though he was too old to do the hard labor that he had done when he was younger, they kept him on as a night watchman. Now, my grandfather was called the Rooster. Why? Because in his younger days, he had a head of thick red hair, like a coxcomb. He died in the watchman's shack of a heart attack. He was not discovered till the change of shifts. People had passed by, looked in the window, and they thought the old man had fallen asleep, so they left him alone. It was only in the morning when the shift changed that they found out that Yusuf Bang, who was my maternal grandfather, had died in that shack. He gave his life for the railroads, for a meager pension. And he was one of the early recipients of Social Security. This was one of the reasons why the unions were so important to him. It was in collective bargaining. It was the strength of, yes, I know how corrupt they could be. I grew up in Jersey City. It's one of historically, it was one of the most corrupt towns to live in at one point. The old Kenny machine ruled it. The political bosses controlled it. Yes, they had their hands in every pot you could imagine, but they got things done. I was born in Margaret Haig Hospital. That's now closed down. It's part of a much larger chain of hospitals, but that was named after Mayor Tom Haig's mother, who was a midwife. In learning about labor, in learning about the importance of this day, And you know why we have the sales on this day? I'll tell you why Labor Day is so. That's the stuff, I worked in merchandise also. As you all know, that's the stuff that came in last year that we want to get rid of. So we mark it down as low as we can. So everybody out there can buy it, and we'll have room for when the Christmas goods come in, which in the last few years means, I remember when we started getting ready for Christmas, it was usually around the end of November. Now we're getting ready for it at the end of August. Talk about rushing the seasons. But what can I tell you about that many of you already don't know? My grandfather, this is something I found rather interesting, would raise heaven and high hell and holy and everything else if he found out that an immigrant who just got off the boat got a job that he was going for. But yet, the Irish, the African Americans, many people, those immigrants who came at the same time as him, he had no problem. In his hierarchical mind structure, because he was here before them, he should have gotten that job. And when I think about the railroads, we think about the coolies, the Irish. Does anybody here ever hear the expression of Chinaman's chance? He ain't got a Chinaman's chance. I know the racial overtone, but how many of you know that actually came from the fact that when the Chinese were building the railroads and they had to blast through mountains, they would draw lots to see who lost. And the one who lost had to go into the tunnels, light the fuse of the dynamite, and run out before it exploded. Hence the origin of the expression, he ain't got a Chinaman's chance. The Irish came here, with the potato famines. Many of them, because of they made them Catholic and because of the prejudices, were regulated to the lowest levels of society and work. It was in the favor of the entrepreneurs to keep these peoples apart, to make them their fighting dogs, to turn them against each other as much as possible. We know the stories of the Triangle Church Factory fire. We know the stories of people whose heads were cracked open by the goons that worked for the bosses to keep the unions out. This is part of our history. This is something that we should not forget. We glorify the millionaire. We glorify those who made it. How many of those made it because of inheritance and the cunning and the knowledge that their ancestors had to help them? In the Middle Ages, there were 3 levels of labor: the apprentice, the journeyman, and the master. The apprentice was usually a child, learning the basics of the skill that would be theirs for life. The journeyman was a paid worker for the master, and the master was the one who was allowed to set up shop. Hence, hang out your shingle. Our term masterpiece comes from the fact that a guildsman would have to present something to the guild to be judged if he was worthy enough to be a master. Our expression blue collar or redneck came from the fact that these are often poorly dyed clothing that the poor could only afford, and the dyes would come off on them. We say the expression redneck, red from being burnt in the labors of the sun. We say blue collar because woad was one of the cheapest plants that could be turned into blue dye. We must never forget the contribution of labor. When we think of labor, when you think of the stories of the African Americans who were dragged here, the answer of the African Americans who were dragged here as slaves, put to work in the fields for nothing more than a meal, than poor meals and sheds living. I've been to the plantations were fiefdoms. Let's be honest. They were fiefdoms, and many of them were started by people whose ancestors came here. Traders, merchants, cart workers, farmers, who kept building and capitalizing on what they had. The unions were not designed to rob the wealthy. They were designed more to level the playing field. Men like Samuel Gompers, and yes, in many cases, African Americans and Asians did not join the unions in the early days, but that has changed. My mother worked in a luggage manufacturing establishment during World War II. She was a seamstress making parachutes, making tents, making duffel bags. And her father by this point was making something like about $1.50 an hour working on the railroads. She was making a grand total of about 30 cents an hour. Why? Because she was 16 when she went to work in this place. This was all part of the war effort. Labor was a part of the war effort. Labor in this, no country, no civilization has existed without labor. So it is on this day that we should remember and honor those people who broke their backs, gave up a good part of their lives. And I close with something my grandfather taught me. Workers of the world unite. Thank you.
Our closing hymn is going to be hymn number 109. And thank you, Joe, for that very stirring message. Hymn number 109, Bread and Roses. The term comes from suffragist Helen Todd. And it was set by a poem by a man, James Oppenheim. And it's most associated with the Bread and Roses strike of 1912 in Lawrence, Massachusetts. We are not going to sing the melody that's in the hymn book. We're going to sing the melody that was written in 1974 by Mimi Farina, a folk singer, and it's very, very popular. And here we go. As we come marching, marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, 1,000 grills loft gray, are touched with all the radiance that a sudden sun discloses, while the people hear us crying, bread and roses, bread and roses. As we come marching, marching, we battle to form men. For they are these comrades, and we fight as one of them. Our lives shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts starve as well as bodies. Give us bread, but give us roses. As we come marching, marching, unnumbered women dead, go crying through our singing, their ancient cry for bread, small ardent love and beauty, their drudging spirits new. Yet is our bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. As we come marching, marching, we're standing proud and tall. The rising of the women. No more the drudge and idler, and toil where one reposes, but the sharing of life's glory, bread and roses, bread and roses.
Our closing words are by Albert Einstein. 100 times every day I remind myself that my inner and outer life depend on the labors of other men, living and dead, and that I must exert myself in order to give in the same measure as I have received and am still receiving. Be kind to your cashiers, overtip your servers and delivery people. Blessed be, go in peace.
Our postlude today was written by a man named Merle Travis in 1946. Merle grew up in coal country, Kentucky, and used his experience working in the coal mine to write a song about it. He recorded it and it went nowhere. And in 1955, a man by the name of Tennessee Ernie Ford recorded it and it went to a #1 hit. And so here we have 16 Tons on the piano.
Hey guys, we're back for discussion.
Good job. I love that. That was great.
Thank you. Good to see everyone.
Hi, everyone. Unmute yourselves so you can